Everybody, thanks so much for joining me today on our next iteration in the Road to Cyber series here. In the past couple of weeks, we've talked about what a virtual CISO is and what the elements that make up what we sort of call an advanced virtual CISO, which is great, and talked about the top 10 cybersecurity fundamentals for small to medium businesses. Today, we're going to talk about, let's just say, for instance, you have some of those implemented and you want to just simply increase your security posture, but you don't actually have any idea what that means. So by increasing the security posture, really what you're doing is you're talking about what your current status is and where you're going from there. My name is David Evenden, and I am the owner and founder of Standard User Cybersecurity, and this is the Road to Cyber. So what we're going to talk about today is, and most of the discussions that we have are based on blog series that I wrote that are up on Pentest Mag, and today we're gonna discuss one of those. So let's go ahead and jump right in here. So here at the very beginning of this one, we're talking about simply increasing your security posture. And again, what that means, what is a security posture, for instance? Let's go ahead and back up. So you might have a bunch of IT infrastructure secured throughout your environment, or rather I should say installed throughout your environment, but you don't have any security elements in place on top of that infrastructure. You might have a few, you might have inbound email security, you may have antiviruses installed in different locations, but for the most part, you may not actually have different portions of those in different spots. So what we'll do is we'll talk about how to identify what those are, how to develop an asset management plan or strategy, and how to move forward from there. So the first step that I always like to encourage people to do within the process of identifying and scoping, as well as increasing your security posture, is understanding what you have and what adversaries are looking for and how they're going to obtain that. And I like to call this the exploitation lifecycle. What is the life cycle? What is an attack lifecycle that an adversary might use to gain access to your infrastructure? So we move down from here. So kind of the descriptions within this, again, you have like the external recon. What does that look like? What do you have externally hosted? And then punching a hole into your internal infrastructure, whether or not it be targeting an individual through a phishing campaign or exploiting something on your perimeter. That's really what your initial penetration is inside of your organization, or the exploit to get access. And so from that perspective, you might obtain a foothold. That obtaining a foothold might be the installation of some type of persistence. And then internal recon and lateral movement. Lateral movement is really your migration from host to host. What are you looking for? As you do that, you might identify what your critical resources are or the critical data is, and then exfil that as an attacker so you can do whatever that is. And so that might be, you might be stealing proprietary or confidential information about your next bid or your next project or geographical locations, or if it's just somebody generally interested in obtaining financial information, that's what that would be. So, and if your end goal for whatever reason is full degradation of service, you might want to damage some type of infrastructure. So taking that portion down to if you have a SCADA system or something similar to that. So moving through, again, here, those are kind of broken up into recon, targeting, breach, persistence, migration, and exfiltration. The image that we'll use throughout the course of increasing your security posture is shown here. Again, moving through the pen test methodologies are really based off of real world methodologies of how attackers attack corporate or enterprise environments. So recon, externally hosted information that an attacker can use against your organization. Target, breach, persistence, migration, and exfiltration. So again, moving through. So what level of data breach can your organization not recover from? So you look at it, say, okay, what's our critical data? What do we have within our environment? And what if we lost this information, we're never going to survive. And so really, as an organization moves through identifying what that critical data is, and then working your way backwards to see who can target that, who can access that, what level of access do they have, where can they access it from, what do you have, who can see it, or what do you have, where is it at, and who can see it. Really your sort of your fundamental aspects of data security. So so really I always recommend by starting with an asset management plan or asset management program or process or whatever you want to call it. And that really just is you going through your environment, identifying your core elements and pieces, whether or not that be you have what might be your confidential or proprietary information, what might be your PII or information about your employees, or PII information about your clients. There's that entire life cycle of what information and infrastructure do you have that someone might want to steal. But you don't really want to start there. You want to start with what everything you have. If you have anything inside of your entire environment, you want to have that. You want to have that inside of an asset management program. And so understanding ownership also is really important. If you have it in your environment, say, okay, well, this is here, our email infrastructure is here. Well, that's great. If I have a problem with that, who will I contact? Well, I don't have any idea. That's part of your asset management program. Knowing who is in charge of that infrastructure or that element within your environment is a really important aspect, because if you have incident response or incident handling or any type of hiccup in the environment, and you don't know who's supposed to fix that problem, or you don't know who's in charge of it, your life cycle of recovery now is drastically longer. So so again, here, moving through the concept and ideas of like closing visibility gaps. So visibility gap within a network infrastructure or security environment really is there something happening in my enterprise network and I cannot see it? That's a gap in your visibility. So do I have some key element of critical data and somebody from a computer can access that? And even when I'm watching this in a test case environment, I see them on their computer, I see them logging into that, and I have all of my dashboard security controls here, and I'm looking for that activity, and I just cannot see it. That's a visibility gap. If I know a breach has occurred and I don't know how they got there, well, that's way too late. You need to do test practice examples of having somebody in your environment see if they can access that, and then see if I can see that activity. As soon as you can realize that and confirm that, you're increasing your security posture by denying that type of activity, because you know what it looks like, you know what happens, and you know how to block it and prevent it. So this is really another good core key example. A lot of organizations think, well, if I have my confidential information over here, but all of my other information over here, as long as there's no internet access here, I'm fine. Well, pivoting sort of defunks that, if you will. I can gain access to one of these elements over here that have internet access and simply pivot my access to access this over here that doesn't have internet access. So just because it does not access to the internet doesn't mean that another entity can't access it. If you can access this from anywhere in the network, then it actually does have access to the internet. You just don't know how to do that. And that's fine. That's not sort of to degrade like your knowledge or capability. It's just a visibility gap that you need to close. So in that same aspect, if I'm seeing someone do something and I can't see that, that's a specific log that needs to be pushed back to whatever log management platform you have. And so understanding how log aggregation works is really another important aspect of that. Where are all of my logs going, whether or not they're syslog or anything. You can send all of them to an ELK platform, or you know, a Graylog platform, or anything like that. If you have more money, you can use a more advanced tool. So again, sort of coming down from off of aggregating your logs within an enterprise environment, you can now pull that back and say, how do I identify or scope if somebody gains access to an individual machine? So you know, patient zero, for instance, would be the first target in an organization that's gained access to, and then they start moving around from there. So if I don't have any visibility on what's changing or happening on my individual hosts or workstations, that's a pretty significant visibility gap. So installing antivirus is a pretty good first step. Obviously, closing that gap of what an antivirus does and what attackers can do is a pretty important element of you understanding what your antivirus can block and what an attacker can accomplish. And so, you know, those are not always one for one. In fact, I know lots of very skilled computer hackers who may be very ethical computer hackers that can bypass nearly any antivirus on the market right now. And so understanding that scope and awareness is just the first step to that. So installing that, understanding a baseline, developing a baseline, and scoping your workstations to prevent some type of anomalous activity is a really good point there. So so again, kind of going through here, what some of those might look like: locking down host firewall, ensuring that it can't be changed, proper configuration of a host antivirus, remote connections to and from a host while you have SMB activity across your workstations. There's no, it's not necessary. Child processes and orphan processes, that's kind of more advanced conversation there, but ensuring that your antivirus does that is pretty important. Utilization of legitimate process slack space. So process injection is a pretty important aspect of that, and DLL hollowing and process injection as well. Whether or not you have some type of covert store for, you know, storing a lot of your elements of what your, that's more advanced than this. We don't need to talk about that. So so again, sort of talking about your host and visibility and capability. So moving from there. Now, the first step there as well is, how did somebody gain access to the host? If they're installing some type of a malware on there, there has been some type of an exploit that got them there. So understanding your perimeter and what your physical immediate perimeter looks like. That might be email, that might be your network, externally facing infrastructure, whether or not be, I know RDP is kind of making its rounds right now. So understanding if somebody can RDP into something, just because you have that hardened, and just because you might have two-factor authentication of some kind on there, doesn't mean that the RDP service or protocol itself, application, if you will, is not vulnerable to some type of remote exploit. So just by installing some type of two-factor authentication doesn't prevent some type of remote exploitation of that service. So understanding who can see that, and you know actually what's happening there, and maybe even preventing network-based connections from an external perspective on that would be great. So kind of moving through there. So again, sort of talking about that anomalous or significant changes in bandwidth. This is talking about your external infrastructure, outbound DNS traffic not originating from your DNS server. So you have outbound port 53 traffic that is not coming from your DNS server. That's pretty important. That's DNS bypassing, and that's a great way to, from an attacker perspective, that's a great way to DNS tunnel out of a network for some C2 infrastructure. Encrypted traffic on, you know, high number ports. You know, if you have some type of traffic going on a high number port and you have no idea what that is, that should be pretty significant to you. So inbound emails with no malicious or otherwise suspicious activity, just really installing something on top of your email infrastructure that allows for the monitoring of specific malicious activity. Pardon me, one sec. So traffic designed, traffic destined to known malicious domains. So that might be outbound activity. Do you have something monitoring your outbound activity for destined to certain types of command and control or C2 servers? So that entire conversation really is based on if somebody has gained access or preventing somebody from gaining access. The way that a lot of OSINT researchers or open source intelligence researchers perform those actions is by doing open source intel research on your domain or your organization itself. What does that mean? It might mean, like, can I identify key proprietary personnel and their email addresses or their phone numbers or personal email addresses or cell phone numbers, desk phone numbers, whatever it is. Am I watching different types of blog posts, whether I be on Stack Overflow or some type of development site, and they're talking about, I can't figure out how to get this managed engine service configuration done properly for all, you know, in order to be able to access it remotely. Well, now you have somebody discussing something that's this key specific element, and you know that where that person works, they work for your target, and you know that they're configuring this managed engine service for them to be able to access it on a remote infrastructure, which should tell you that somewhere out there, somewhere, there's a managed edge service that's accessible. And as soon as you start to scan that and look for that, there might be some type of default password or remote exploit that might allow for you to gain access to that target application. So all of those elements, by doing research on your target environment, whether or not it be, again, watching videos. In the past, we've actually watched training videos where someone was performing specific training and they had a sticky note on their computer and no one realized that they were they were recording that piece of that sticky note, that piece of information was now broadcasted on YouTube. We've already seen it had just a username and password on there. Be able to go to that IP address and log in is just an oversight. And whenever you're trying to help your end users accomplish a specific task, so the goal is this, and not really thinking about what's being recorded or what's being seen, those types of things really can be harmful. So again, research mitigation techniques. So actually understanding what different types of processes can be performed and elements can be implemented to help alleviate some of that pressure for you. So one thing that I learned a while ago when I was at the NSA was, if you're not a cryptographer, don't develop your own cryptography. And I actually apply that to everything else. If I'm not some type of wizard financial person, I really don't try to take care of my finances by myself. I just don't know what I'm doing. If I'm not, you implement and put that into the space. If I'm not really an expert in that field, I probably shouldn't be doing that myself. If you're not an expert in the cybersecurity field, then you probably should not think that you know what you're doing. Researching and implementing everything, yes, 100%. More power to you. You can figure it out. You can do it. But doing that in production on an enterprise environment is probably not the right time to be learning it. Learn it on your own time, allow for somebody to come in and do that for you once you're up and skilled, and now you know how to step into that spot, then take that over. Yes, so I encourage that. I encourage the additional learning and processing through, but doing that on your own is probably not the right spot to be doing it. So this has been sort of a general recap of how to increase your security posture by understanding where a baseline exists and then moving up from there. Thanks so much for joining me, and I hope that hope you learned something. And we'll see you next time on the Road to Cyber.